These are both diatonic harmonicas in the key of C with the same note layout, and yet they sound different and they are radically different in a certain way. Let's delve into the difference between just intonation and equal temperament. So I've got two harmonicas here that, apart from the colour and the kind of specific shape of them, are the same type of harmonica. They're both diatonic harmonicas in the key of C major. They're both made by Hohner and they're both quality instruments. But they've been intentionally tuned in a slightly different way to accentuate different aspects of music. This harmonica here, the Special 20, has lovely rich full chords. But the single notes are not necessarily perfectly in tune with each other for playing single note melodies. This harmonica, however, is a golden melody. Now the chords won't sound perfectly rich and true, but the single notes will sound perfect in tune with each other. Now, why would Hohner make both of these? And which is better? In order to understand and get an answer to this, we're going to have to learn a little bit about tuning. There have been several different ways of deciding how to tune notes throughout history. Let's start with just intonation. Now, with just intonation, we arrive at a system of tuning which occurs naturally from the overtones series. This is a physical reality. When a string is vibrated, for example, you hear a note, but there are also overtones in there, higher notes that continue to infinity. Now, we can calculate how to find these notes perfectly in tune using simple ratios. Here's a table showing you how the different intervals are calculated. Now, this is quite beautiful, really. It's simple mathematics, and it's a fascinating way of showing how physically notes are produced and how they relate to each other in a simple mathematical way. Just intonation results in perfectly sounding chords. You're in touch with the vibrations of the universe and they sound absolutely beautiful, rich, and true. However, the exact tuning depends on the key that you are in. This is because the spacing between each note is not exactly the same for every key. It depends which note you start with as your starting point to work out your fractions. For this reason, just intonation is great if you play an instrument where you can change the pitch yourself, such as stringed instruments. However, for fixed tuning instruments, this results in a problem with tuning. Historically, with the increasing use of fixed tuning instruments and the increasing desire to play in all different keys on one instrument, a solution had to be found. This is where equal temperament comes in. Equal temperament is a tuning system developed for pianos and keyboards in order to help them play in all keys with minimal intonation problems. Now, the way that this was worked out was by splitting the octave into equal steps from one note to the next. This allows all of the different keys to sound the same as each other. This means that you're not going to have the same problems that you'd have with just intonation. However, it means that the chords are not going to sound as rich and true as they did with just intonation. You won't be in touch with the natural vibrations of the universe. You won't be linking up with the natural overtone series. So in this sense, equal temperament is not a perfect solution to the problems we faced with just intonation, but it does allow instruments to play in all of the different keys with their individual melodies sounding equally good or bad as each other. So what all this means is that if you take a specific note, for example an F, you can't just say that an F is an F is an F is an F, because it depends on the fine tuning of the instrument. So if we look at a diagram comparing a just intonation tuning with a equal temperament tuning of the full scale, you can see the difference between the frequencies of the notes. Some of the notes are similar, the octave is the same, and some of the notes are further apart. The notes that are quite similar in either tuning, you might not detect a difference, but the bigger difference is your ear will detect this. And so this is something that isn't just academic, it is something that you'll hear as a player and as a listener. Okay, let's get away from the history of tuning and get back to our instrument, the harmonica. So what does all this mean to us as harmonica players? Well, the thing is, when you play harmonica, you're entering into all sorts of considerations and difficulties that a lot of other instruments don't have. The harmonica creates some amazing, rich, beautiful chordal sounds, but equally, if it's not perfectly tuned right, it can create some pretty horrible sounds as well. It's almost like everything on the harmonica is exaggerated, the good and the bad. So that means you have to consider these tuning issues and complications when you're buying the instrument, and certainly when you're tuning the instrument yourself. Remember that at the start of the video, I said that these harmonicas are the same. They're tuned to the key of C major, but I said one of them, the Special 20, the chords sound better, and the other one, the Golden Melody, these single notes sound better. So based on what you've learned about the history of tuning, which one do you think is tuned to equal temperament? Well, of course, it's going to be our Golden Melody. And that is something that is really quite distinctive about this instrument. Most harmonicas are not tuned to equal temperament, but the Golden Melody, as the name suggests, is tuned so that the melodies sound really lovely in every key. So you can pluck out any scale on this instrument if you've got the technique, and you can play those notes perfectly in tune. Now this is how modern pianos are tuned, so this should play like a piano. However, most harmonicas are not tuned this way. Most harmonicas are tuned more like this Special 20. I should say that this is not tuned to perfect just intonation. This is tuned to a kind of compromise tuning to facilitate good all-round playing, combining chords with single notes. But any way of tuning the harmonica in this way will be, as the name suggests, a compromise. Different makes and models from different manufacturers will have come to their own compromise when they're tuning the instrument, but they probably won't have tuned it for equal temperament, for the perfect melodies in every single key. Now, not all of the differences are going to be immediately audible. You can usually tell a difference between the chords. Bit rough, smoother. But with the single notes, it's harder to hear just by absolute pitch, unless you've got perfect pitch. It's easier with relative pitch. So if you're hearing a harmonica played to a backing track, certain notes will sound way off. The one that is easiest to hear is the 5 draw. So you should be able to hear, even without a backing track or a song to play along to, that the 5 draw on the Special 20 is significantly lower than the 5 draw on the Golden Melody. Now, don't worry if you can't hear that without the context of a song. You would be able to hear that if I were playing along with a backing track. So which is better? Should you buy a harmonica that's tuned for chords or for single notes? The answer depends on context. If you're going to be playing complex music with interesting chord changes, perhaps playing in lots of different positions, maybe you're playing jazz, classical, complex music styles, then you probably want to get hold of an equal temperament harmonica, like the Hohner Golden Melody. If you're playing blues, if you're playing simple melodies, if you're going to be only playing in one or two positions on the harmonica and you're going to use lots of different keys of harmonica, then you probably want a harmonica that is tuned more for the chords. That said, most harmonica players are not playing chordally all the time. So that's why most harmonicas are tuned to a kind of a compromise tuning, where especially the notes down the bottom are tuned for the chords, but further up they're going to be more tuned to suit the single note melodies. The reality is every single different make and model of harmonica is going to be fine-tuned slightly differently. You can check online, you can speak to the manufacturers to find these things out, but it's going to depend on how they wanted to tune it, and whether you like that or not is going to be a question of your type of playing and what sounds you actually like the sound of. Certain people can hear those differences more, and certain people will prefer to have closer to the chords or closer to the single notes. It's really up to you. A couple of things to consider if you're searching for a harmonica closer to just intonation, so you're thinking about the chords. The first thing is that you're probably not playing chords all the time. So you don't want to get too obsessed with this idea of a chord tuned instrument, because even players like, say, William Clark, played nice chords and lots of octaves, but also loads of single notes. So harmonicas these days, most of them are tuned for a combination of both, which is always a compromise, but makes more sense than some of the traditional tunings if you go back to the early and mid 1900s, where they were very close to just intonation. Not many people are playing a full chordal style these days. The other thing to consider is that the exact way you'd tune a harmonica for just intonation depends on the chords you'd want to play. So just intonation as a tuning, well, the definition, the exact tuning of those individual notes on the instrument would depend which of the chords you're choosing to play. Some final considerations then on picking a tuning with the harmonica. Sadly, even if you take two supposedly identical instruments, these are both special 20s in the key of C, through manufacturing faults and sometimes just simply the harmonica when it's in transit to you in the post, they're not always going to play exactly the same. So all of this talk of fine tuning can become a little bit of an irrelevance or a secondary matter when you find you get a harmonica from the company and the notes aren't exactly as they should be on a tuning table. That's sadly just the reality of it in terms of manufacturing and delivery of these instruments. The other thing is that it depends on how hard or soft you play. If you pull and push the notes more, you'll send them flatter. And with that in mind, harmonicas tend to be tuned slightly sharp of what you would expect them to be. That's because when playing in anger, when playing in a band context, players tend to pull a bit more, they force the notes a bit more and it sends everything flat. But that will depend on the specific way you play. Some people do play softer, and you'll find that people who play golden melodies and play multiple keys learn to play softer so that they can get things perfectly melodically in tune. But you will have realized from a lot of what I said that it's not just about the instrument itself, it's about you. You will have to decide what's best for you and your style of playing. I hope this has helped you to understand a little bit about the history of tuning and the differences between different tunings of harmonica. There's more information, examples and diagrams via the link to the free summary in the description. What's your favourite tuning? How do you approach tuning a harmonica, and which harmonicas do you choose to buy for their tuning layout? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Until I see you again, good luck with your practice. Cheers.